All right, let's put the women and children to bed and go looking for dinner. John Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now for our special SEC offseason breakdown. Want to remind you to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on Apple Podcasts. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We're the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. Also want you to check out Inside College Basketball Now on Spotify for all of our great off-season content, including interviews and discussions with some of the biggest names in the game. Meanwhile, leave a comment with a question attached under this episode on Spotify or drop a review with a question on our feed on Apple Podcasts, and we'll try to get it answered live on the show. So, as we did last week with the Big Ten, today, we are going to dive into the SEC from soup to nuts, give you everything you want to get you ready for SEC coverage. We are going to continue this with all of the other power conferences throughout the next 3 weeks. We will also have another episode of Inside College Basketball Now later this week with an SEC head coach. There's a lot to get to. There's power rankings. There's our SEC Preseason Player of the Year. There's our SEC Preseason Sleeper. But none of those things usurp what's most important, and that's 3 big things surrounding the SEC. So we are going to start right here with 3 big things surrounding the SEC, and number one is that 10 or more teams could still reach the NCAA tournament from the SEC in 2026. Now, here's one thing I want to make clear. We may never again in our lifetimes see a season like we did last year in the SEC, where 14 out of 16 teams reached the NCAA tournament. Beyond that, though, 2 teams from the SEC, Texas and Oklahoma, finished 6-12 in league play and still found a way to get into March Madness. Now, I know as well as anybody else does that your SEC and your conference record has no bearing on whether or not you will make the NCAA tournament. But it's still amazing to me, just as it was amazing years ago when West Virginia made the NCAA tournament with a 7-11 record out of the Big 12, that a team that only wins a third of its regular season games in its own conference is good enough to make the NCAA tournament. That reiterates again the importance of the non-conference schedule. Remember, Oklahoma last year won the battle for Atlantis and also beat Michigan and Charlotte. That is why we say every game matters in college basketball. Now, one of the main reasons why the SEC did so well last year in terms of NCAA tournament representation with 14 out of 16 teams is because the league benefited probably more than any other league because of the COVID senior. This year, we are going to see a little bit of a passage. This year, we are going to see a changing of the guard. The SEC, think about this for a second, will return only 3 of its top 25 scorers from a year ago. And that is something, in my opinion, that should give fresh faces an opportunity to stand tall in the SEC conference. The SEC is not going to be what it was last year, and no league in history may ever again replicate what the SEC did in 24-25, but make no mistake about it, the SEC is still well positioned to have great representation in the 2026 NCAA tournament, and I'm going to use this example. I rank 45 teams every single day in the Rothstein 45. The SEC has 12 teams ranked as of today in the Rothstein 45. That is 3/4 of the league. The second thing, in terms of my 3 big things for the SEC entering 25-26, Florida could go back-to-back and repeat as national champions in 2026. But I want to point something out. When Florida went back-to-back and won the national championship in 2006 and 2007 under Billy Donovan, that entire starting 5, Torian Green, Lee Humphrey, Corey Brewer, Joakim Noah, Al Horford, all returned from the team that won the national championship in dominant fashion in 2006. That is not going to be the script this year in Gainesville. Now, to Florida's credit, Todd Golden was able to return 4 pieces from that front court that anchored the Gators' run up front on the glass to the national championship. Tommy Houck, Alex Condon, Ruben Chenyelu and Micah Handlogden, all back for Florida, and that's massive for the Gators. But I remember years ago sitting at an AAU tournament with a power conference coach, and he told me, John, the way you measure on how good a team is going to be early is going to be by the quality of its guard play, and does that team have returning guards at its disposal? Florida does not have that. Now, Florida went to the transfer portal and got really, really good guards. Florida got Xavier Lee from Princeton, who was highly sought after out of the transfer portal. We don't know yet how he's going to react to power conference competition on a daily basis. We know, though, that he's an Ivy League transfer that put up quality numbers and big numbers at Princeton. We know that Boogie Fland from Arkansas was a massive get for Todd Golden and company, a lead guard who prior to getting injured last year was playing like one of the best freshmen in the country and at times one of the best guards in the country, especially early in the season when Arkansas beat Michigan at Madison Square Garden. Fland went for 20 points and 7 assists. Boogie Fland will enter this season with the expectation of being an all-SEC first-team caliber guard. That is what you have in the backcourt for Florida. Florida doesn't have what it had when it had Walter Clayton Jr., Will Richard, Elijah Martin, Denzel Aberdeen, who's since transferred to Kentucky. It doesn't have that, but it may still have enough to win a national championship. Todd Golden has also added A.J. Brown from Ohio. He has also added, a top-tier freshman in C.J. Ingram. You have to take top-tier freshmen, in my opinion, in this climate with a grain of salt because you don't know when they get into the crux of the rotation who's actually going to produce and produce at a high level when you're dealing with college veterans. Florida, because it won the national championship, will enter the SEC as the league's preseason favorite. But I got to tell you, looking at this conference right now, it is as wide open as I can remember. There is no clear-cut favorite in the SEC entering the 25-26 season. You could make a case for Florida, and you should. You could also say, you know what? Arkansas returns the highest percentage of returning scoring of anybody in the SEC and brings in 2 quality freshmen in Darius Acuff, and it also brings in Malik Thomas. You could make a case for Alabama, Auburn, Kentucky, Tennessee. There is no clear-cut favorite right now in the SEC. But when you talk about the SEC, you are always going to have all of your eyes on Rupp Arena and Lexington and the Kentucky Wildcats. Now, this is what I'll tell you. Hats off to Mark Pope. Hats off to Kentucky staff because what they did last year, putting together a team that had never played together before, putting together a team that was in a situation where it did not return a single player from the team previously under John Calipari that was a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. For Mark Pope to do that and to get Kentucky to the Sweet 16, it was a magnificent coaching job. And I think one of the things you have to feel good about if you are a Kentucky fan when it comes to Mark Pope is this. Many players in the transfer portal are being evaluated by their overall talent and what they can do from a production standpoint. Mark Pope thinks about putting together a team. He does not look and try to just accumulate talent. And that was reiterated with the way he built Kentucky's roster in his first season. And I can tell you this much, he's done it again. But to me, the real wild card, the real guy that can change things for Kentucky this season is Arizona State transfer Jayden Quaintance. Jayden Quaintance, who played last year at Arizona State, is coming off an ACL injury. I've talked about this with Mark Pope on this podcast. I've talked about this with Mark Pope off this podcast. When you try to figure out when Jayden Quaintance is going to return to the court, there is still no firm timetable. There is still no answer. Kentucky has said repeatedly that they hope to get Quaintance back for the start of the season, but taping this right now on July the 14th, nobody knows. But watching this kid last year when he was at Arizona State, watching his timing on defense, watching his ability to read opposing offenses. If he's healthy, Jayden Quaintance, in my opinion, has a legitimate chance to be in the discussion to potentially be a National Defensive Player of the Year candidate with guys like Zuby Ejiofor from St. John's, with guys like Joseph Tugler from Houston. That is what you're looking at when you're looking at Jayden Quaintance, because I look at the other elements of Kentucky's lineup, and I love what I see. Jalen Lowe from Pitt, the transfer, a point guard that will set the table every time he touches the ball at Rupp Arena. There's quality pieces on the wing with Denzel Aberdeen from Florida, Cam Williams from Tulane, Colin Chandler, also Otega Oweh, going to be one of the best players in the SEC. And I love the addition of Mohamed Diabate from Alabama as a potential glue guy. The one thing you could probably say about Kentucky right now is how deep will Mark Pope go in the rotation? How many players will he use in a big game? But there is an embarrassment of riches in terms of the depth. There is a large surplus of parts for Mark Pope to work with. We've also heard great things about Brandon Garrison's progression up front for Kentucky. But I think if you're looking for a wild card, a player that could change Kentucky, a program that hopes every single year to go to a Final Four and have a chance to win a national championship, that player is Jayden Quaintance. That's the type of player you need, like almost a knuckleball pitcher in middle relief when you're trying to close out a playoff series in baseball. A game changer defensively if he's healthy, a National Defensive Player of the Year candidate if he's healthy. I think you can make the case Kentucky has just about everything else. You know Jalen Lowe is going to be a starter. You know Otega Oweh is going to be a starter. You would think Mohamed Diabate is going to be a starter. And then the other spot on the perimeter, I would say right now is probably up for grabs. You could make a case for Colin Chandler because he's been there. You could make a case for Denzel Aberdeen because he's coming from a program in Florida that won a national championship. But make no mistake about it. The guy that can change things for Kentucky in 25-26 is Jayden Quaintance. This is only July. I'm John Rothstein. When we return, we will give you our SEC preseason power rankings and also many early season awards. This is Inside College Basketball Now on the CBS Sports Podcast Network.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you. When you need your sports in a snap, find it on CBS Sports HQ. Streaming free anywhere you are.
All right, let's get right now into our SEC preseason power rankings. This, again, and I want to point this out, is the power rankings that I would have going into the season. This is not where I think necessarily people are going to finish. It's if we're starting the season based on the rosters you have now and what I've seen up to this point, this is how I forecast your team. Number one, I'm going with Florida. The defending national champions have earned that right. As I talked about at the top, there's four front court players back. Houck, Condon, Chinyalu, also hand-logged in off the bench. Xavion Lee, Boogie Flan, players that, again, on the perimeter should have a big-time impact. Florida's in the one spot. Meanwhile, at 2, I'm going with Arkansas because of the amount of returning personnel that John Calipari has at his disposal. Wagner, Trevin Brazile, Carter Knox, and Billy Richmond are all players who were a part of that run to the Sweet 16 last year that wound up in a loss to Texas Tech in San Francisco. It hasn't been publicized a great deal. Carter Knox against St. John's and Texas Tech in the NCAA Tournament combined for 35 and 12 in those two games. Darius Acuff is a player as a freshman point guard, and John Calipari's had a lot of them that I think should take tremendous pressure off the Billy Richmonds and the DJ Wagners and the Carter Knoxes. John Calipari has a team, unlike a year ago, that has a base of returning experience. That's why I have Arkansas with a slight edge at 2 ahead of Kentucky. Kentucky's in the 3 hole for me. Jalen Lowe, I'm a big fan of the transfer from Pitt. Otega Oweh is going to be one of the best players in the SEC. You've heard me talk about Kentucky. I'm looking, though, at this roster and I'm looking at the guys who I've talked about. Haven't talked yet about Jasper Johnson or Malachi Moreno, 2 freshmen. Haven't talked about Trent Noah, who was in the system. If you're looking for another under-the-radar storyline for Kentucky, it's this. In addition to the wild card that is Jayden Quaintance, how many guys is Mark Pope going to be able to play this season? How many guys is Mark Pope going to be able to use on a nightly basis? Because if you look at it by the numbers, and every team is different, every year is different, but if you look at it by the numbers right now, last year for Kentucky, Mark Pope played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 players in double-figure minutes. Same thing could happen in 25-26. In the 4 spot, the Auburn Tigers, coming off a Final Four appearance for the second time under Bruce Pearl. Now, the good for Auburn, you got back to Todd Pettiford. You got back a potential preseason All-American. You got back a shot maker that was flirting with the NBA draft. That was the positive for Auburn. Here's one thing I want to point out now. It's a lot different when you evaluate Auburn's roster last year at this time versus this year at this time. Auburn a year ago, even though it lost to Yale in the first round of the NCAA tournament, very good Yale team coached by James Jones, who's one of the more under-the-radar coaches in our sport. Auburn last year, entering last season, returned 8 players who averaged double-figure minutes. So it was set up for Auburn to enter last season on fire, which it did. It separated itself quickly as a team to beat and a team that was going to be a potential 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. 8 players who averaged double-figure minutes. The only player on Auburn's roster, in Auburn's program right now, that averaged double-figure minutes that's returning from the team that lost to Florida in the Final Four is Todd Pettiford. Now, I like the other pieces. I like the other pieces in Bruce Pearl's program. Kevin Overton from Texas Tech, nice player. Keyshawn Hall from UCF scored a lot of points on teams that haven't won, but is a gifted offensive player. Keyshawn Murphy from Mississippi State, nice piece. Talking to the Auburn staff, they feel really good that JUCO add Abdul Bashir is going to be a plug-and-play guy because of his ability to score. But if you're looking big picture now, and you're evaluating Auburn, this is what I want you to remember. A year ago, Auburn was returning 8 players who averaged double-figure minutes the season prior. This year, it brings back 1, Todd Pettiford. Be patient with Auburn early. In the 5 spot, Alabama and Nate Oates. You lose Sears, you lose Nelson, you lose Amori, you lose Diabate, you lose Chris Youngblood. But getting back LeBaron Philon late in the NBA draft process was monumental for Nate Oates and company. You also have Aiden Holloway back. Jaleel Bethea is an add-on for Miami. And I think, and I was fortunate enough to be working in Cleveland when Alabama played its first and second round NCAA tournament games in Cleveland. The guy I think that can be an absolute star for Alabama this year is Aiden Sherrill. Cliff Amori was obviously a veteran big man, deserved the role, deserved the minutes, great above the rim player. But Aiden Sherrill is a breakout player to watch nationally, who, again, hasn't had the usage that he will have this season. Also remember Latrell Wrightsell, who missed the large portion of last season with an Achilles injury, is expected to return as a shot maker off the bench. Got to get more water in here next time. Nate Oates told me last week that Wrightsell should be available, you would hope, for the start of the season. So that's good news for Alabama. In the 6th spot, I've got Tennessee, coached by Rick Barnes, who has led the Vols to back-to-back appearances in the Elite Eight. Now, a year ago, Tennessee lost Dalton Connect, still made the Elite Eight. But you had Zakai Ziegler back. You had Jemai Mashack back. You had Jordan Gainey back. And he brought in Chaz Lanier. Looking now at Tennessee, I think Tennessee is a dark horse Final Four team. Now, why do I say that? You know, Rick Barnes' teams are always going to be the elite of the elite defensively. You know, Felix Okpara is going to anchor that defense for Tennessee. But Rick Barnes' best teams throughout his coaching career have always had elite point guard play. He's went to the Final Four once as a head coach. Who was the point guard on that team? TJ Ford in 2003 at Texas. He went to the Elite Eight at Texas in 2008. Who was the point guard on that team? DJ Augustine. He's went to the last two Elite Eights at Tennessee. Who was the point guard? Zakai Ziegler. Now you have Jacoby Gillespie, a first-team All-SEC caliber player. You know he's going to run the offense as an extension of Rick Barnes. You know that the defense, anchored by Felix Okpara, is going to be top tier. And there's some good pieces you like in the transfer portal to plug the gaps. I'm a fan of Jalen Carey from Vanderbilt. I'm a fan of Amari Abram as a guy who, in my opinion, can, bring some seasoning and some pedigree and some scoring. But the thing you have to like about Tennessee, and this is a wild card because he's a freshman, but you're bringing in a high-level talent in Nate Ament, who is going to play with a veteran point guard in Jacoby Gillespie, whose job is going to be to set him up, and a big man behind him in Felix Okpara, who is just coming off a year in which he was a starter on a team that went to the Elite Eight and went to Houston. Nate Ament and his ceiling, and if he reaches that ceiling, could go a long way in turning into what Tennessee ultimately does this season. And I just went through 6 teams right now in the SEC. Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky, Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee. And the 6th team I'm talking about as a SEC preseason sleeper. That tells you the depth of the league. That's why I think 10 or more teams can get into the NCAA tournament in 2026. And in the 7th spot, you got the Texas Longhorns, who are being coached by Sean Miller now, taking over for Rodney Terry, who led Texas to the NCAA tournament in each of the past 3 years. This is a team that has elements of continuity. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, ironically enough, in the first 4 last year, Xavier, coached by Sean Miller, came back to beat Texas, who was coached by Rodney Terry. But Sean Miller was able to retain Tremont Mark, Kendall Weaver, Jordan Pope, all guys who played on that team last year at Texas. And then Sean Miller brought from Xavier Dalen Swain, a player as he transitions from sophomore to junior that I think will be an absolute star in college basketball. And also Lucina Traore, who was supposed to be Xavier's starting 5-man a year ago, but missed the entire season with a knee injury. He averaged a double-double 2 years ago at Long Beach State. That's what we're looking at for Texas. 8, Mississippi State. Chris Jans should have another NCAA tournament team. Josh Hubbard and Jaden Epps give you a potent guard combination. In the 9 spot, I'm going with Chris Beard and Ole Miss, which is an incredibly low spot to put a Chris Beard coach team. But again, that reiterates the quality of this league. Chris Beard returns one major piece from last year in Malik Dia, who's projected as a starter up front. Chris Beard has added James Scott from Louisville as a projected starter. He's added A.J. Storr from Kansas, Corin Johnson from Louisville. But the wild card for Ole Miss, and again, I hope that I'm getting this young man's name right, because from talking to people in basketball around the globe, this is the guy to watch that could really put Ole Miss on the map again, is Elias Carmodine, an international prospect that has all SEC caliber potential in Oxford this season. This is one of the reasons why people should be bullish on Ole Miss, not just because of Chris Beard, not just because of the experience that he's brought in via the transfer portal. Elias Carmodine, again, you have to take, for me, all of these foreign players with a grain of salt. I saw UCLA bring in a slew of foreign players a couple of years ago, and it represented the first time in Mick Cronin's career in like a 12-year span where he missed the NCAA tournament. I saw Xavier bring in multiple European players a couple of years ago, and Xavier, again, struggled to get production from those European players. I take it all with a grain of salt. Not every player is going to be Kasparis Yakachonis or Tomislav Ivicic like we saw at Illinois last year. But from everything I've gathered, Elias Carmodine is expected to be a big-time addition to Ole Miss. In the 10 spot, I have Texas A&M. Bucky McMillan has quietly done a really nice job building out his roster via the transfer portal. Pop Isaacs, proven college player. Rylan Griffin, proven college player. Mackenzie Mgbako, big upside. Federico, a starter on multiple teams that have played in the NCAA tournament. In the 11 spot, I'm going with Missouri. Mark Mitchell is coming back as a projected All-SEC first-team player. Anthony Robinson is a breakout guy nationally. And Dennis Gates also went to the West Coast to add two guys from Los Angeles who should push for a starting spot. Javon Porter from Loyola Marymount and Sebastian Mack from UCLA, who averaged close to double figures. So Missouri, again, should compete for an NCAA tournament berth. And then in the 12th spot, you have Porter Moser in Oklahoma. Now, Porter Moser has adapted to this portal world and really, in my opinion, got some guys who are very under the radar because they're guys who, again, at one point in time were very, very highly sought after. But they, again, went to the portal after not maybe playing as much as they would hope, like Darion Reed from Alabama, or like Nigel Pack was fortunate enough to get an additional year of eligibility from the NCAA. Now, another player who the SEC fan might not be as familiar with is Xavier Brown from St. Joe's. Xavier Brown's stepfather, Justin Scott, was an assistant coach at St. Joe's. He is now on Porter Moser's staff at Oklahoma. He is going to be part of that perimeter with Nigel Pack, Darion Reed, which gives Oklahoma a chance to go to the NCAA tournament for the second time in as many years. Now you start getting further down in the SEC, but I don't want to dismiss this next team because, again, I had this team as well during the NCAA tournament. This, to me, was one of the great stories last year in college basketball. Vanderbilt last year, in year one, under Mark Byington, was picked 16th in the SEC and finished with an NCAA tournament bid. Lost a really, really hard game to St. Mary's in the round of 64 in Cleveland. But again, a tremendous coaching job by Mark Byington, who also led James Madison to the NCAA tournament and a win over Wisconsin in 2024. I talked to Mark Byington last week. He likes his team. He likes the depth of his team. You have to like the fact that there are a couple of players back, Devin McLaughlin, Tyler Nickel. You also have to like some of the players that were added. Frankie Collins is a guard that has a ton of high major experience from Michigan to Arizona State to TCU. You could say the same with Duke Miles. Tyler Tanner internally, they're very high on. He was a key player in the rotation last year. It wouldn't shock me to see Vanderbilt back in the NCAA tournament picture. Georgia's in the 14th spot after losing, obviously, Asa Newell and Silas Demery as a transfer to UConn. LSU and South Carolina are 15-16, but I'm looking at this now, and I'm looking at an LSU team that added Didon Thomas from UNLV at point guard, and I'm looking at a South Carolina team that got Michi Johnson back, and I also am looking at a South Carolina team that got Miles Studi back. Lamont Paris, in a phone conversation last week, told me that the staff is exceptionally high on Mike Sharaf-Jumps, who, again, has bounced around him into a number of schools. But I'm looking at LSU and South Carolina, and I think one story in the SEC is the teams at the bottom of this conference are going to be better in 25-26 than they were in 24-25. Now, let's get now to some more preseason awards. Who's my all-SEC preseason first team? And if you're just watching now for the first time during these conference breakdowns, I am not somebody who will put more than 5 players on an SEC or any conference preseason first team. I won't do it. I won't do it for All-American teams. I won't do it for preseason teams or postseason teams. You play with 5 guys, that's what I have. There are some really, really tough calls here. This is my All-SEC preseason first team. You got to have Mark Mitchell on from Missouri. He had a big year last year for Missouri going to the NCAA tournament. He's on. Otega Oweh from Kentucky, the same thing. Jacoby Gillespie, proven by what he did at Maryland. He gets the nod from Tennessee. Then we got Tahad Pettiford from Auburn and Boogie Flan from Florida. That is my All-SEC preseason first team for right now. You could argue other players. You could make a case for LeBaron Philon. He was really, really close. Gillespie gets the nod, though, over him because of what he did on Maryland. Think about the guard play we are going to have this year in the SEC. You saw 3 of them right there. LeBaron Philon's another. You're going to have really, really good guard play in the SEC this year. My SEC preseason player of the year is going to go to Otega Oweh from Kentucky. He was a starter last year and obviously a key piece on that team that went to the Sweet 16, was a part of NCAA tournament wins, was a big part of that win, obviously, for Kentucky in the SEC tournament. You have to like, obviously, Otega Oweh coming back with proven college experience, somebody that is evolved into one of the best players in the SEC. Who's my SEC preseason sleeper? This might be a little bit of a surprise. I am going with Bucky McMillan and the Texas A&M Aggies. Now, for a lot of people who aren't familiar with Bucky McMillan, this is somebody who came from the Birmingham area. We had him on this show on Inside College Basketball Now a couple of weeks ago. So, again, check us out on Apple and Spotify and check out the episode with Bucky McMillan if you want to get, further versed on, obviously, his path and so on and so forth. But he was the high school coach for Trendon Watford, who went to high school in the Birmingham area, then went to LSU to play for Will Wade. He then became the Samford head coach, led Samford to the NCAA tournament. Samford almost beat Kansas in 2024. Now he's the Texas A&M coach. He's got a really, really nice first-year roster. Pop Isaacs, Ryland Griffin, Mackenzie McBacco, Federico. Should be a really good shooting team. Should be a team, in my opinion, that has a chance to compete for an NCAA tournament berth in its first year under Bucky McMillan. I have talked for long enough. I want to get to your thoughts on my SEC preseason power rankings, my takes on the league. What do you think about Otega Oweh being the SEC preseason player of the year? Your comments next. John Rothstein here with you on a Monday in July. This is Inside College Basketball Now on the CBS Sports Podcast Network.
Get ready.
Wait a second. I thought we were going tubing.
All 3 Sonic the Hedgehog movies and Knuckles are now streaming on Paramount Plus.
And everyone loves it.
Every adventure,
Just try to keep up.
every face-off,
This ends now.
and every moment that will have you saying,
Where have you been? My entire life!
It's showtime!
all 3 Sonic the Hedgehog movies and the entire Sonic universe are now streaming on Paramount Plus.
All right, John Rothstein back here on Inside College Basketball Now. We are doing our SEC offseason breakdown. If you're just joining us, we are going to do 1 conference breakdown per week over the next month. We're going to break it all down from soup to nuts. Reminder to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on Apple Podcasts. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We are the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. Also, leave a comment with a question attached under this episode on Spotify, or drop us a review with a question on our feed on Apple Podcasts, and we'll try and get it answered live on the show. Right now, it's all about the chat, your questions, your comments. Let's get to it. Andre Walker says Abdul Bashir will come in and be an immediate impact player for Auburn. Well, Andre, you share the sentiments of Auburn's staff. Auburn's staff is confident that Abdul Bashir will be a factor offensively. You start thinking about the perimeter right now for Bruce Pearl. Pettiford, Kevin Overton, Bashir, Keyshawn Hall. Could be a versatile type perimeter for Bruce Pearl coming up this season. Next question. Everybody's animated about Florida going back to back. One more cast says, John, it'll be hard for Florida to win it again. Well, it's going to be hard for anybody just to win one NCAA tournament game, but Florida's experience, especially in this climate, is, I don't want to say unheard of, but Florida's experience from a national championship team is incredibly, incredibly strong. Now, if you look back at UConn's national championship teams that went back-to-back, let's think about who started for UConn, right? In 2023, Tristan Newton, Jordan Hawkins, Andre Jackson, Alex Caraban, and Adama Sanogo. Donovan Clingan was like a starter, but he came off the bench because Sanogo was so dominant. So UConn, when it went back-to-back and won the second title in 2024, was able to get 3 starting caliber players back when you looked at Newton, Caraban, and also Donovan Clingan. If Florida starts those 3 big guys, Howe, Condon, and Chinyelu, they're going to have 3 starters back as well. Flash says Arkansas was better without Boogie, and Lee is from an Ivy League conference. Look, that's fair. 100% fair. Arkansas, DJ Wagner especially, played better when Boogie Flan was not available. And you're right about Xavion Lee. As I've said, I don't want to say you take a wait-and-see approach, but I did take a wait-and-see approach with a lot of those foreign players, and I do with a lot of those foreign players that I mentioned when teams are banking on this guy carrying them. But you have to tip your cap at some point to a team that won the national championship, and now all of a sudden, Boogie Fland is going to be a year older. Boogie Fland early in the season, again, like I go back to the Michigan game, is going to be playing in a lead guard role. He had 20 points and 7 assists against Michigan at Madison Square Garden. He's going to be a player who might have a chance to be one of the best guards in the country next season. More questions here from the chat. Let's see. Flash says, John, when healthy, Kentucky will be a top 5 defense. I don't disagree. I mean, I'm following up on this stuff nonstop about Jayden Quaintance trying to get his progress in track because I firmly think with Diabate, with Quaintance, you're going to have 2 guys behind Kentucky's guards on defense that are going to cover up a lot of mistakes. Look, Jayden Quaintance, and I want to point this out with Arizona State. Arizona State, early in the season last year, played good basketball. Arizona State beat New Mexico, team that won a game in the NCAA tournament, beat St. Mary's, team that won a game in the NCAA tournament, went to Gonzaga and was very competitive. There was a number of close Big 12 games that Arizona State lost, but there was a stretch where Jayden Quaintance was ridiculous defensively. And it's not so much shots blocked, but it's the shots that he alters. It's the shots that he contests. It's the shots that he forces the opponents to change. Looking at Jayden Quaintance and looking just statistically at what he was able to do from a defensive perspective, you're looking at somebody again, and I read this and I remember during the season, he had back-to-back games in Big 12 play in January where he blocked 5 shots. This is the player, again, a type of player who can transcend things defensively for Kentucky. I'm talking about a player who could lead the country in block shots if he's healthy, and we got to find now when he's going to be able to be available for Kentucky. Joe Ireland says, John, Chris Beard is on year 3 now at Ole Miss. I'm curious if Beard turns his team around in that short time frame like he did with Texas Tech and in Texas. Well, he's already done that. Chris Beard made Ole Miss a bubble team in year 1. Chris Beard took Ole Miss to the Sweet 16 for the second time in program history in year 2. Chris Beard has already done that. It was a worthwhile gamble for Keith Carter to hire him at the time, and it's paid major dividends. That hire has changed the course of Ole Miss basketball. Chris Beard was offered a boatload of money to go to Texas A&M, but he stayed at Ole Miss out of loyalty, got a nice raise, and he's got a team again that should be right there in the NCAA tournament. We'll keep going here for more takes on the SEC. John Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now. Eli Drink-A-Beer is pointing out that Chris Jans had a losing record every year at Mississippi State. That might be true, Eli, but if you look at Chris Jans' record in the SEC, and he's referencing what I was talking about with Texas and Oklahoma having 6-12 records, Chris Jans won 8 SEC games the last 3 years. And if you're good enough to win 8 SEC games the past couple of years, you're good enough to be somewhere in the middle of the bracket. Now, if you are a Mississippi State fan and you are looking at what is next for your program, and it's a very difficult job, you want to be able to win a game in the NCAA tournament. And I would be remiss if I did not, in a situation, point out the dynamic, for Josh Hubbard to be somebody who is, again, another potential star in college basketball and another guard in the SEC that is going to be a microwave type scorer. The difference, I think, that you're looking at with Josh Hubbard and some of the other guys that are listed as some of the best guards in the SEC is they haven't been a part of winning or haven't been a part or are not forecasted like Boogie Fland to be in a situation with a really, really high usage. Todd Pettiford is somebody who was on a team that went to the Final Four. Jacoby Gillespie is somebody who was on a team at Maryland that went to the Sweet 16. That is why those guys are projected ahead of Josh Hubbard. Otega Oweh is coming back from a team that went to the Sweet 16. That is why some of those guys were first team all conference under Josh Hubbard. But the combination of Epps and the combination of Hubbard gives Chris Jans a dynamic backcourt that I think will be potent enough to get this team back to the NCAA tournament. Keep going right here. One more question. Cameron Pleasant says, John, question for you. Do you see Kentucky having issues in the beginning of their season due to too many mouths to feed type of situation? Cameron, that is a great, great question. It could be a factor. I'm going to right now go back to a story that Mike Bray, the former head coach at Notre Dame, once told me. He was at a Notre Dame practice, and he said, John, depth is overrated in games, and it's underrated in practice. I'll go back to another SEC coach, Ben Howland, who went to 3 straight Final Fours at UCLA. He always told me he was very comfortable playing 7 guys. I think playing too deep a rotation sometimes limits your rhythm and chemistry. I think you need to have depth if, God forbid, you have an injury, if, God forbid, somebody twists an ankle, if, God forbid, somebody gets the flu. But I think the best teams have 7 or 8 guys, and they stay at 7 or 8 guys. I saw it last year with UCLA's team. Not that they're an SEC team, but they raved in the offseason about having so much depth. But when you're trying to placate people and play them a certain amount of minutes, it is difficult sometimes to get into a real rhythm and real usage with your best players. Those are all facts of life. We're going to take a short break. We're going to come back with 3 good nuggets on the SEC. I'm John Rothstein. This is Inside College Basketball Now on the CBS Sports Podcast Network.
Critics are buzzing about the new season of Yellow Jackets.
This is not healthy.
Yellow Jackets' new season now streaming on the Paramount Plus with Showtime plan.
John Rothstein back here on Inside College Basketball Now on the CBS Sports Network. Let's wrap this with 3 good SEC nuggets. Same faces, same places, new faces. Only 3 of the SEC's top 25 scorers from a year ago return. Those 3 guys: Josh Hubbard, Mississippi State; Otega Oweh, Kentucky; Mark Mitchell, Missouri. Oweh and Mitchell, part of my All-SEC preseason first team. Nugget number 2, bottom improvements. I talked about this with LSU and South Carolina being better. Remember, those 2 teams in SEC regular season games last year are combined 5-31. I don't think that happens in 25-26. And then nugget number 3, Regal resumes. Since Sean Miller was hired at Texas, that now means that 9 of the active 16 coaches in the SEC have at least coached in the Elite 8. We'll be back later this week with another episode of Inside College Basketball Now, and we'll be back next week with another conference off-season breakdown as we continue to get you set for the 25-26 college basketball season. I'm John Rothstein reminding you, this is only July.